Elorera, they say, often used to visit this warren and that, staying a few days with the chief rabbit and his outlaw, and advising them about any problems they had. Even the oldest and most experienced rabbits respected his advice and were glad to see him. He was not usually in any hurry to talk about himself, but was a most sympathetic listener, always ready to hear of others' difficulties and adventures, and to give praise where it was deserved. I've often found myself hoping that one day he may drop in here, and I think we ought all to keep a wary eye open for him, for they say that often he's not so easy to recognize, and he has good reasons for that, as you shall hear. They say that there was once a warren called Potterville, whose rabbits thought the world of themselves. According to them, there was no one so spruce, no one so daring, no one so fleet of foot as the rabbits of Potterville. And as for newcomers, well, you more or less had to have a personal recommendation from Prince Rainbow to get in there. The chief rabbit was called Hendred, and before you could even speak to Hendred Ra, you had to be brought up and introduced by one of the outlaw. And as for his doe and Flolin, oh, she was a dream of delight until you knew her well enough to realize that she lacked practically all the qualities of an honest rabbit and had other rabbits to do everything for her. Well, one evening, two of the outlaws of this precious warren, Hellion and Thygen, were making their way home after a successful raid on a distant kitchen garden. When near the outskirts of Potterville, they came upon a rabbit, evidently a Halesi, a wanderer, lying on his side under a thorn bush, breathing hard and plainly in a bad way. One ear was torn and bloody, both his front paws were just about encased in dried mud, and he'd lost half the fur on his head. As they approached him, he tried to get up, but after 2 attempts, he fell back and lay where he was. They stopped to look at him and make sure he wasn't from Potterville. As they were sniffing him over, he said to Hellion, "Sir, I'm afraid I'm in a bad way. I'm utterly exhausted and I know I can't run. If I stay here like this, I think one or other of the 1,000 is bound to get me. Can you give me shelter in your warren for the night?" "Give you shelter?" answered Hellion. "A dirty, disreputable rabbit like you? Why?" "Oh, it's a rabbit, is it?" put in Thygen. "I was wondering what it was." "You'd better get yourself out of here," went on Hellion. "We don't want the likes of you hanging about near Potterville. Someone might think you came from there." The Halesi, who seemed desperate, implored them to help him to get to their warren, for he thought it was his only chance. But neither of them would do so, saying that a dirty vagabond like him would only bring disgrace on the name of Potterville. They left him still pleading and made their way back without giving him another thought. About 2 or 3 days later, Elorera dropped by, as was his wont in the long days of summer. Hendred greeted him with much respect, saying he hoped he would stay with them several days and enjoy the clover, which was just in season. Elorera accepted the invitation and said he would like to meet the outlaw, whom he hadn't seen for quite some time. They all came proudly before him, with sleek fur and white flashing tails, and Elorera praised their appearance and told Hendred that they looked the most likely lot. Then he spoke to them, glancing from one to another as he did so. "You look the most handsome bunch of rabbits," he said, "that anyone could well wish to see, and I'm sure your hearts and spirits are just as good as your appearance. For example," he went on, turning to one of them, a big buck by the name of Frizzle, "what would you do if you were coming home one evening and came upon a wounded Halesi who begged you to help him to your warren and give him shelter for the night?" "I certainly help him," replied Frizzle, "and let him stay with us for as long as he liked." "And you?" asked Elorera, turning to the next rabbit. "The same, sir." And so they all said. Then Before their very eyes, Elrera slowly changed and little by little became a pitiful lazy whom Hellion and Thayan had encountered a few evenings before. He fell on his side and as he did so, looked up at Hellion and Thayan. "And how about you?" he said, but they answered nothing at all, only staring at him in consternation. "You didn't recognize me then?" inquired Elrera. All the rest of the Ausla gazed from him to Hellion and Thayan, not understanding what he meant, but guessing that there must be something disconcerting between Elrera and these two. You didn't look like yourself," faltered Thayan at last. "We couldn't tell that I was a rabbit, is that it?" said Elrera. "Are you sure you know now?" Then, before he changed back, he made them all come up close and look at him. "To make sure," he said, "that they'd know me another time." Hellion and Thayan were fully expecting that he'd come down hard on them in some way or other. But all he did was to tell Henzard, in everyone's hearing, what had happened that evening when they'd come upon him lying under the thorn bush. They all knew in their hearts that they wouldn't have done any better, and they left him without another word. All except Hindred and a grey-furred, ancient-looking rabbit, whom Hindred introduced to Elrera as Thermeron, the oldest rabbit in the warren. "All I want to say, my lord," quavered Thermeron, "is that if I had seen you that evening, I would have known that you were not what you seemed, although I can't say whether I could have told that you were our prince with 1,000 enemies. But that you were in disguise, I would certainly have known." "How?" asked Elrera, a little put out, for he had been feeling that no one could have looked more the part of a poor old lazy than he had. "Because I would have perceived, my lord, that you didn't look like a rabbit who had seen the hole in the sky. Nor do you now, for the matter of that." "The hole in the sky?" said Elrera. "And what may that be?" "It can't be told," replied Thermeron. "It can't be told. I mean no disrespect, my lord." No, that doesn't matter," said Elrera. "I just want to know what you mean by the hole in the sky. How can there be a hole in the sky?" But the old rabbit seemed as though he hardly knew he had spoken. He bobbed his head to Elrera, turned and limped slowly away. "We generally just leave him to himself, my lord," said Hendred. "He's quite harmless, but I sometimes wonder whether he knows night from morning. I'm told he was a dashing gallant of the Ausla in his time. But what did he mean by the hole in the sky?" "If you don't know, my lord, I'm sure I don't," replied Hendred, who, truth to tell, had felt rather nettled at having two of his Ausla shown up for a couple of blighters. Elrera didn't refer to the incident again. He stayed 2 or 3 more days and behaved as though nothing unusual had happened, and when he left, wished the warren good fortune and prosperity, as he was accustomed to do. He puzzled a lot over what Thermeron had said, and everywhere he went asked other rabbits what they could tell him about the hole in the sky. But no one could tell him anything. At last, he realized that he was beginning to be thought a little odd on account of this preoccupation. So he gave up inquiring. Privately, however, he wondered more and more. What could old Thermeron have meant? He came to the conclusion that, although he was the rabbit prince, he must be missing something really splendid and rewarding, some sort of secret thing. Probably a number of those he had asked knew perfectly well, but weren't giving anything away. It must be marvelous, the hole in the sky. If only he could fight it and somehow or other get through it to the other side. There must be the most miraculous things to find. He wasn't going to feel contented until he had discovered it. Well, as you all know, Elrera's journeyings take him everywhere. Far beyond the range of ordinary rabbits like ourselves, who are happy enough with green fields and elder bloom or clean bracken and gauze. High heels and deep boots he was quite accustomed to, and could swim across a river as well as any water bowl. But of course, with such wanderings as that, he was liable to encounter some curious and unusual creatures, some of whom were distinctly dangerous. And the story tells that one evening, getting on for nightfall, he was going along a narrow path in some lonely hills when he came face to face with a creature called a timberlier, one we know nothing of, praise be thanked, except that they're fierce and aggressive. "What are you doing here?" asked the timberlier in no friendly tone. "Get back where you belong, you dirty rabbit!" "I'm doing no harm," replied Ella. "I'm simply going along this path and not bothering you or any other creature." "You've got no business here," said the timberlier. "Are you going to turn round and go back around you?" "I'm not," said Ella, "and you've got no right to tell me to." Then the timberlier rushed upon Ella, grappled with the timberlier among the ragwort and nettles, and there was a terrific battle up and down the path. The timberlier was strong and very agile, and it wounded Ella badly, so that he had lost a lot of blood. But Ella gave as good as he got, and in the end the timberlier was glad enough to break off the fight and go limping away, cursing Ella as it went. Ella felt weak and dizzy. He sank down where he was on the path and tried to rest. But his wounds were hurting so badly that he couldn't find any position in which he could be comfortable. Night came on, and still he tossed and turned in horrible pain. He must have slept at last, for when he next looked about him, it was becoming light, and a thrush was singing from a nearby birch tree. He tried to stand, but at once fell down. The pain of his wounds was still bad, and since he couldn't walk, he was forced to stay where he was on the path. He began to believe that he would die there. Soon he became delirious and lay all day without noticing the passage of time. Sometimes he slept, but even in his sleep he was aware of his pain. He fancied Rapscuttle was with him and begged him for help. But Rapscuttle slowly faded and became a hunched juniper bush on the down where Ella thought he was lying. Then he thought he was Hazel, telling Hythensley to take good care of the warren while he was gone with Campion on a special wide patrol. But all these figments either dissolved or else blended with one another, to be glimpsed as Ilu seen in the tail of his eye. All day he was turning his head this way and that to try to see them clearly. And meanwhile, some rabbit was whispering jokes in his ear, only he could never quite catch what they were about. He was worn out with pain and fear. He heard a rabbit begging for Rapscuttle to come, and after a while realized that it was himself. He nibbled at the grass where he was lying, but he could not taste it. "It's special grass, master," said Rapscuttle out of sight behind him. "Special grass to make you better. Go to sleep." Next morning he saw quite plainly a green fox approaching along the path. Again he tried to stand, but just as the fox disappeared, his legs gave way, and he fell on his back and lay there, staring stupidly up at the sky. Then he began to tremble with fear. In the blue curve of the sky, he saw a great rent, a cleft which he perceived was an open gaping wound. The two irregular edges were jagged as though it had been made with something blunt, something which had first cut and then ripped and torn. Here and there threads of flesh, still attached to the edges, stuck out across the wound, obscuring whatever was behind. All that he could see in the separating depth of the wound was blood and pus, a glistening, viscous, uneven surface like a marsh. The edges were messy too, fringed all along with blood and yellow matter on which flies were walking. As he stared in horror, the dead body of a rabbit fell out of the wound, but disappeared as it fell. To Ellera's distraught eyes, the whole gash seemed to be slowly moving, two parted lips descending to close over him and draw him in. Squealing, he fell from the edge of the path, rolling down the slope several times before he lost consciousness. When he came to himself, he was clear in his head and his wounds were less painful. He felt now that he could probably get back home, so that his doll, Norama, and the faithful Rapscuttle could look after him until he was himself again. He went a short distance, rather slowly, and then lay down in the sun to do his best to clean himself up. It was while he was thus resting on the hillside that he became aware of Lord Frith speaking to him in his heart. "Elorera, you should not undertake any more dangerous adventures, at least for the time being. You don't need to impress your people with more great struggles and journeys. You've done enough. They already love and admire you as much as is good for them or for you. Be lazy and enjoy the summer like an honest rabbit. You have already shown yourself equal to anything likely to come your way." "My lord," replied Elorera, "I have never questioned your ways, dark and mysterious though they often are. But how can you suffer to exist in your creation that terrible horror? That wound, that horror past bearing?" "I don't, Elorera. Look up at the sky. It's not there, is it?" Elorera looked fearfully up. The hole in the sky was no longer to be seen. "Yet to allow it even for a moment, my lord, it was never there, Elorera." "Never there? But I saw it with my own eyes." "What you saw, Elorera, came out of your delirious mind. It wasn't real at all. I had no power to stop it." "And that old Emeron in Paderel, he could perceive that you had never seen the hole in the sky." "Never speak of it again. Rabbits who have seen it, like yourself, don't want to talk about it, and those who haven't only think you're strange." Elorera took the experience to heart and felt himself the wiser. He never again saw the hole in the sky, and he never spoke glibly about it, especially to rabbits who he could perceive had undergone suffering something like his own.